All right, welcome back to the channel. Big smack being talked. Kell Brook said he is getting close to that Terence Crawford fight, and he is 100% that he's going to touch that glass jaw, and that fight can end in a knockout. Let's talk about Kell Brook knocking out Bud Crawford, or not, in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, looks like we're gonna get, I'm hoping we can. I'm hoping, you know, cross your fingers, do all kind of superstitious stuff that you can get. That we're gonna get a Terence Crawford versus Kell Brook fight coming up soon. Kell Brook is the former IBF welterweight champion. He is also, and Terence Crawford is the current WBO champion. There's been a lot of issues about the level of competition for Terence Crawford. People have been wearing on Terence Crawford steadily and consistently for about a year now. Really hard. People really started talking about it maybe a year and a half ago, really heavy. But now it's like Terence Crawford's name is synonymous with ain't fighting nobody. You know what I mean? Like, who ain't fighting nobody? Terence Crawford ain't fighting anybody. You know what I mean? Who's padding their resume? Oh, Terence Crawford's padding their resume, right? Terence Crawford name is now synonymous with padded resume. Excellent fighter, right? Great fighter, super talent, physically super talented. Nobody he's fought has been able to stay with him at all. Looks completely dominant. But, you know, many people say that's because, again, you're padding your record. You're not fighting anybody that is of any major significance. So, now that he has been at the 147-pound division for 2 years, you know, the heat is getting serious. Kell Brook is now the guy that it looks like he'll be fighting. Of the two people that I know that there's a chance that he'll fight, that I know there's a chance of, one is Kell Brook, the other is Egis Kalvalouskus. If he fights Egis Kalvalouskus, Bud might as well retire. Just stop. Because your name is going to be, oh my, I mean, I cannot imagine the abuse, the YouTube verbal abuse that will take place against Terence Crawford if he fights Egis Kalvalouskus. But Kell Brook is what I've said and I maintain is the least acceptable fighter. You want to see Terence Crawford in there against Errol Spence. You want to see him in there with Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, Yuriorkis Ugas. One of the guys that you know, that one of the guys at welterweight who are dominating the lower level guys at welterweight, not guys like that are getting blown out by would get blown out by top level welterweights like Amir Khan, like Jose Benavidez, like Jeff Horn, like like Egis Kalvalouskus. Those type of guys. Don't want to see that anymore, right? But Kell Brook kind of fits nicely into that because he did take a shellacking against Errol Spence Jr. for sure. However, against Errol Spence Jr., he showed excellent boxing skills. He showed, I mean, for a large part of that fight, up until Errol really started breaking him down and tearing him down, you know, Kell Brook was doing extremely well in that fight. He was very, very competitive. It's just that Errol Spence Jr. was just too much for him. Way too much for him. Too much pressure. That body work started getting with him. He started getting winded. And, you know, that was Errol going at 100 miles an hour on Kell Brook. And he winds up stopping Kell Brook. The other loss that Kell Brook had was against Gennady Golovkin in the fight that Kell Brook was beating Gennady Golovkin, or, you know, was looking very good against Gennady Golovkin up until, you know, he got caught by a 160-pound fighter that has one-punch knockout power like Gennady Golovkin. So, yes, there's a lot of wear and tear on Kell Brook, but if you look at Kell Brook and say, okay, if he can make it down to 147 pounds, right, and there's not an issue with that, and I don't think that there will be. I don't think that there'll be a problem at all with Kell Brook making it to 147. First, this is not for the IBF belt, right? Now, if you recall, Kell Brook was fighting for the IBF championship when he was fighting Errol Spence Jr., which means he and Errol Spence Jr. both had that 10-pound rehydration clause, you know, going into the fight, which Kell Brook if he had a difficult time getting down to 147 at all, but then he had to take that whole extra half of a day into the morning, I don't know what that would be, like 16 hours or so, between where they have to, it might even be, it might be 24 hours. 24 hours or maybe a little less than that he has to keep that weight off of him or can't regain any more than 10 pounds. That very well could have affected him in his endurance with Errol Spence Jr., but not be as big a concern when he fights Terence Crawford. So with Terence Crawford, you have Kell Brook fighting a guy he's not as big as Errol Spence Jr. He's not as big, definitely not as big as Gennady Golovkin, the two guys that fought him. And Terence Crawford doesn't really fight in the same style as Errol Spence Jr., where he's wearing you down and wearing you down and wearing you down. Terence Crawford is much more of a pot shot type of guy, man. Much more of a pot shot type of guy. And Kell Brook might be able to deal with that more easily. Also, the thing about Kell Brook, now I'm not saying that he will. I'm just saying that's why I'm putting him into the acceptable realm. The least acceptable because obviously he has the wear and tear, but the skill set, the ring IQ and all that stuff, it is definitely high enough where it is legitimate competition, competition for Terence Crawford. Now, another the reason why I think that it'll be very interesting, the thing that I think would make the fight interesting is that Kell Brook has a reputation for being very excellent with southpaws. So if you notice with Errol Spence Jr., Kell Brook did a very, very good job in the early rounds of coming over the top of the southpaw jab for Errol Spence Jr., which is a very, very sharp, very quick, very responsible jab. The Kell Brook was consistently able to come over the top of it when Errol Spence Jr. threw it. And one of the things that you notice one of the trends about Terence Crawford, I think that could play well into, is the fact that whenever, if you look at the way Terence Crawford fights, and this is going to be obviously be an oversimplification of it, but there's almost two different types of guys in the ring when Terence Crawford is fighting. You have the southpaw Terence Crawford, and you have the orthodox Terence Crawford. And there are distinct, from what I can see, very distinct situations in which the two guys come out, or the way the style that Terence Crawford chooses to fight in. When he feels like he is in trouble, or like he is trying to be defensively responsible, he switches to the southpaw stance and makes a guy attack him in the southpaw stance. Well, that isn't going to necessarily work with that won't work as well with Kell Brook, because Kell Brook likes to fight southpaws. So since he likes to fight southpaws, he's very strong against southpaws. Switching into a southpaw stance is not going to add a lot of confusion to Kell Brook. Now, Kell Brook's wear and tear, maybe the weight loss, maybe his lack of athleticism as it compares to Terence, his lack of athleticism when you compare his athleticism to that of Terence Crawford, that might prevent him from really taking advantage of things. But I mean, as far as the mindset and the understanding of what to do, it's right there. And also, like, if you listen to what like Derek James says about Terence Crawford and some of the things that you heard coming out of the Gary Russell Jr.'s camp about Terence Crawford, when you hear people that are not really just like praising him, what you'll hear him say is that one of the great gifts that Terence Crawford has is that Terence Crawford he's an excellent athlete, right? He's tremendously strong for his height and for his size. He's tremendously strong. He's very, very fast. He's got excellent reflexes. He's Roy Jones Jr. like in a way, in that he is bringing just an extra level of talent to the ring. However, when you find somebody that is very, very technically sound, they can take advantage of that, who understands your style, they can make things happen that you might not expect to happen. Now, I say all that to explain why I think that it is realistic, that this is a decent fight for Terence Crawford. Now, is Kell Brook going to knock out Terence Crawford? I do not believe so. Like, I think one of the things about Terence Crawford that is the most talked about, like over talked about, is his lack of a chin. I mean, anybody can get hurt in the ring. And I've definitely seen him wobble, but I've seen him wobble twice. He gets wobbled like once every 3 years. So this is not something where every time he gets touched or every time he gets hit, you see this guy get wobbled, but he did get caught by Egis Kalvalouskus, who's a legitimate welterweight, right? A legitimate welterweight, not a guy that was moving up from 140 like pretty much everybody else. or kind of like, definitely not on the garbage level that the Jeff Horn is. But anyway, you get my point. I don't see the knockout happening. I don't see the knockout happening either way, quite honestly. I would be surprised if Terence Crawford stopped Kell Brook. But I think that we'll be able to see a lot of things where Terence Crawford is going to have to make adjustments. I think Kell Brook is going to come in with a really good game plan. And I think there's a chance that Terence Crawford can get tested if Kell Brook is not completely washed, right? Unless he's completely weight drained from getting down, and that extra amount of time for him not being, for the IBF, for being the WBC, even if that comes into play, that's the problem for it. But knocking Bud out, I don't see it, man. I don't see that at all. I don't see him winning. But you let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.